Today on Sporting Top 10, we're coming at you with another edition of Who's Better. And this Who's Better consists of two of the best pure point guards the NBA has to offer. As we're going against Isiah Thomas, is going head-to-head versus John Stockton. Now, in my opinion, these are two of the top 3 point guards of all time, along with Magic Johnson. Maybe Oscar Robertson gets thrown into the conversation, but let's get right into this. First off, we start off with the basics. The measurements of Isiah Thomas. Isiah measures in at 6'1". He weighs 185 pounds at that point guard position. Compared to John Stockton, who measures in at an identical height of 6'1", but 9 pounds lighter than Thomas at 176 pounds at the point guard. Now it's time for me to diagnose them and give them a label for their player type. I consider Isiah Thomas to be a playmaker, facilitator, and quality defender, as his well-rounded game helped bring the Detroit Pistons 2 championships, and when he first got there, out of mediocrity. But funny story, Isiah Thomas didn't even want to go to the Detroit Pistons. He wanted to fall in the draft 1 spot later to the Chicago Bulls, but the GM of the Pistons told Isiah that he wasn't going to let that happen. If he dropped to number 2 and Mark Aguirre went number 1 in that draft, he was going to take him. Lucky for Isiah, it all worked out. And now let's move on to John Stockton's player type. I consider him, much like Isiah, a playmaker, facilitator, and a quality defender. I would say that John Stockton is a bit better defender than Isiah Thomas, because John Stockton is the all-time leader in steals in NBA history. And John Stockton has the ultimate respect of his peers. As I have heard multiple NBA vets and past NBA players talk about how John Stockton was a nightmare when they were playing offense against him. And the ultimate respect comes from your peers, so I will take their word for it. And now, let's move on to the teams that they played for. They're both pretty simple, as Isiah Thomas went to Indiana University and won a national championship with Bobby Knight in his sophomore season. Then the next year, he went into the NBA draft, where he got drafted by the Detroit Pistons, led them to 2 titles, stayed there his whole career. And then we got John Stockton, who went to Gonzaga. Now, Gonzaga, you might say, oh, good school for basketball, but listen, Gonzaga wasn't a powerhouse back in the 1980s like they are today. John Stockton was basically the first to come out of there. He put them on the map in the 1984 draft. That draft was a loaded draft consisting of Charles Barkley, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Michael Jordan. And when he got drafted 16th overall in that draft by the Utah Jazz, stayed there his whole career. Now, these 2 point guards is unlike anything we've seen. We hardly see star players stay on one team for their whole NBA careers. So it is a much different league back then. And now let's move on to the accolades for both of them. Isiah Thomas was a 2-time champion. They were back-to-back in the years 89 and 90 with those bad boy Pistons, along with Bill Laimbeer and Dennis Rodman. And then 12-time All-Star, 2-time All-Star Game MVP. It means he could succeed with the best of the best in the game. 1990 Finals MVP, reaching he played his best on the best stages, so that's always great when you're looking at career accolades. 3-time first-team All-NBA, 2 second-team All-NBA. Now, I want to point this out. He was battling Magic Johnson for that spot. Magic Johnson is considered a top 5 NBA player of all time, not just point guard. So those All-NBA selections mean a bunch. Now, we got John Stockton, all-time leader in steals and assists. Now, let that set in for a minute. Those are 2 of the 5 major statistical categories that he leads all time. The 5 major statistical categories in basketball: points per game, assists per game, rebounds per game, and blocks per game, steals per game. He holds 2 of those 5, 40%. I wouldn't say that's not that bad. And then they go 10-time All-Star, All-Star Game MVP, 2-time All-NBA first team, 6-time All-NBA second team, 3-time All-NBA third team. Very, very consistent through the years. 5-time All-NBA defensive second team. Like I said, grindy defender, grinded it out, like Gary Payton a lot. And then we go 9-time leader in assists, 2-time leader in steals, and he was a gold medalist on the 1992 Dream Team. unlike Isiah Thomas, who kind of had controversy surrounding him that season, as he and Larry Bird kind of had a bit of a confrontation after that playoff series that Isiah Thomas tragically lost with the Pistons. And so he was chosen to be left off that dream team, while John Stockton remained on it. Now let's dive into the statistics. I will be looking at some of the prime years, and for Isiah Thomas, I will be looking at the 2 championship seasons where they went back-to-back. Isiah Thomas, throughout the early 80s into the mid-80s, averaged around 21, 22, 23 points per game. He came in, averaged double-digit assists after a year where he only averaged 8 assists per game. With better teammates around him year after year, he succeeded in thriving and getting the ball, and he's around 4 rebounds per game. His numbers dipped a little bit in the championship seasons, but that's because they had so many people to go to. Like, they had Adrian Dantley, who was an offensive scoring machine, Bill Laimbeer, who was the big man down in the post, Dennis Rodman, the list goes on and on. Joe Dumars, Vinnie Johnson, the microwave off the bench, super deep. Isiah could take a back seat some nights to those players. Nothing to be ashamed of. Now, let's take a look at the career statistics for the John Stockton. Now, his dominance was more in the late 80s, where the prime statistical years for Isiah Thomas was more in the early 80s. But let's take a look at this. John Stockton was always around 17 points per game in this 3-year stretch that I'm pointing out. And always, look at these assists. 13.6, 14.5, 14.2. Chipping in a few rebounds. He was a very small guy. I'm surprised that those rebounds are as high as they are, actually. And much like Isiah Thomas, took a bit of a statistical cut to get to where they wanted to be. As Karl Malone was coming into his own, he was in his prime. Karl Malone's the second all-time leading scorer, only below Kareem. So he could take a bit of a backseat some nights, like Isiah. That's why these numbers went down. But I love John Stockton. And that's why the verdict that I come to is John Stockton slightly edges out Isiah Thomas. I would rather take John Stockton if I was starting a team that they're both in their primes. Listen, my point guard doesn't need to score that much if I have great players around him. And John Stockton proves that. John Stockton averaged 14 assists per game through his career. That's absolutely crazy. And that's why he's the all-time leader in assists. I absolutely love John Stockton. And plus, Stockton had great longevity, rarely got injured, and like I said, all-time leader in assists and steals. And the assist numbers were absurd. And his supporting cast, besides Karl Malone, I mean, they had some shooters and stuff, but besides Karl Malone and the pick-and-roll duo, he didn't have many players to complement him. That's why, along with, if you look at Isiah and Detroit, they had a much deeper squad, like those players I mentioned earlier. Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer. The list goes on and on for great players they had. And they met Michael when he didn't have Pippen or Rodman. The difference between maybe winning those 2 championships like they did and maybe losing one or not winning them at all, like John Stockton did. John Stockton met arguably the greatest team in the finals in the Bulls when they had Rodman, Pippen, and Jordan. You can't stop that. I don't care who you are. And I say Isiah Thomas is a slightly better pure scorer than John Stockton. There's no shame. But like I said, I don't need my point guard to score that much. John chipped in about 18 points per game, and he was a better two-way player as a bit better defender. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Sporting Top 10.